Chapter 261, Limping to the Finish Line. Hendricks, Kant. It wasn't long before people flocked in. His team set up camp a distance away from everyone else and mostly kept to themselves. But as more and more people came pouring in, it began to become untenable. Word had spread, and it had spread fast. Which wasn't something Hendricks thought he'd say after telephone lines and satellites were destroyed. Oh, to have a phone again. Most scientists, engineers, researchers, or any other of their ilk were stuck working on more important things. The array he used being one of them. Phones took too much infrastructure to rebuild quickly. Sure, they discovered a way to get electricity working again, but it was no good for the fried motherboards and chips that every device had. To get everything up and working again, it would take an entire overhaul of everything delicate inside the electronics. The only thing that survived was the hardiest of technology. Things that weren't reliant on extremely tight tolerances. A techie had explained it to him once, but he only got some of what the man was trying to say. Phones, computers, and anything with a motherboard were built with only a specific amount of electricity to run through it. Any more than that, and they would fry. After the change, electricity, even in small amounts, carried with it lightning mana. Mana, which was an energy that the boards were not capable nor designed to withstand, greatly exceeded that capacity. It was like pumping the amps or volts up, or so that was how he thought of it. Hendricks wasn't a Sparky. Some of the other internal parts worked. Some didn't, as the new energy wreaked havoc on certain parts. Batteries were built to contain a charge. They weren't built to contain mana. The redesign of those was simple. Find something that could contain both electricity and mana. Capacitors were the same way, if a touch different, because of their distinct use. That was about the end of his understanding, but the main takeaway from all of that was phones were possible, just not yet. Even if scientists rediscovered, reinvented, or redesigned a way for them to work, it would be reliant on the same technology as before. Cell towers and satellites, both of which they didn't have. They also didn't have the servers capable of running them or the manufacturing capability to build them, which was why most research was directed towards more magical solutions. Messengers, communications officers, radio operators, all the various jobs that relied on communication and were turned into professions or classes, had skills that could do it. Send message and pigeon delivery were the most straightforward and obvious, but there were also project voice, which could be used over great distances. Communication spells that mages worked up. Dimensional mages were spending long nights trying to invent teleportation with no luck. Hendricks would just be happy with a car. That or a plane of some kind. Traveling thousands of miles over land on foot was not fun, and he did not wish to do so again. Somehow, in a day without phones or any other way of communication over great lengths, word spread like wildfire. Starting with only a few hundred, then a few hundred more, then another group, another one after that. The endless tide never stopped. Camps took up every open space around the monolith, and it only continued to get more crowded, which was when the fights broke out. With a few years spent in their new reality, with powers that made people feel strong, conflict was inevitable. Butting heads, colliding egos, short tempers, it was all on display. It only got worse from there. Hendricks and his team were months early. The only people around were either locals or small groups traveling through that noticed something unique. As time ticked down, that wasn't the case anymore. Solidified groups, larger and more organized, started streaming in. Pylons and their leaders sent people to investigate and were coming back in force. Then factions started to arrive. It started with those that were close by at first. Three Rivers, a faction Hendricks knew about and was told to not cause conflict with. They were set up to the south where the Ohio River met and merged with the Mississippi. The Heartlands Alliance. The collection of pylons and their owners who banded together in what they called the Heartlands. Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska. Anywhere corn was grown was how Hendricks thought of it. Smaller factions rolled in from the southeast. Atlanta, Jackson, Birmingham. A cowboy with a much too large head strolled in like he owned the place and came from Hendricks could only assume was Texas. The Stormlands, from the Midwest. New York and New England. Nearly everywhere was represented one way or another. Only Florida and places far to the north were still making their way. Florida's peninsula turning into a series of islands didn't help for travel. As the crowd grew, so did everyone's ideas. With the thousands that were present, everyone wanted their voice to be heard, which was nearly impossible. Until people actually came to blows. Hendricks wasn't sure who started it. The other advanced teams had arrived by then, which made his position stronger, but the group of 100 was still outclassed by most of the other factions there. That being the case, they were mostly dismissed. They didn't have the numbers or the strength of some of the other people, and in this day and age, that was all that mattered. Still, they were close enough to the action that they could see the conflict happen. Lightning flashed down, and everyone's danger sense went wild as tempers flared. It took some pushing and shoving, but Hendricks eventually got to a position so he could see what was happening. A man was dead, blackened and burnt to a crisp, and two people were arguing over his smoldering body. "Do not talk to me like you can order me around," a man yelled angrily. He wore a fancy robe with branching lightning bolts embroidered on it. They curved and branched up the sleeves before dancing along the center of the robe. Hendricks' first thought wasn't about the gaudy robes, but on how powerful the man felt. It was like standing in the middle of a storm waiting to be struck down. It wasn't hard to figure out who the man was. Only one person wore such opulent robes and talked so arrogantly. The Stormbringer, another title he pinned on himself. From the power radiating off him and the fact his conquering of Chicago was well known, he could call himself anything he wanted when he had the power to back it up. "You think you can just kill one of my men and get away with it?" Another screamed back. His hand gripped his sword, which was already drawn. The hat gave him away, but so did the accent. It wasn't a coincidence that the two most arrogant people came into conflict early. Seeing where this was heading, Hendricks made a quick exit. He did not want to get caught in the crosshairs. Things like that only kept happening. The deaths were kept to a minimum, especially with so many healers around, but it was still surprising. Not only that people would do that, actually murder another person for such silly reasons, but that it kept happening. It was like gang retaliations. One side had to get revenge, and it started a cycle that could never end. Luckily, Hendricks wasn't the one meant to deal with all of this. He was only the leader of an advance team. He wasn't a diplomat or an ambassador. The admiral would have to deal with everything when he arrived. When the timer hit 3 weeks out, he finally did. The factions all had similar enough themes that they were easy to lump together and identify. Some even had banners and flags that they carried with them. Most settled for badges and insignias. One faction had everyone dress all in one color. None were as cohesive and unified. Having most of their army comprised of former military demanded that of them, even if they technically didn't have a country to serve anymore. Arriving with thousands at his back already gave the admiral a bit of notoriety, but it only grew when people realized that he was an actual admiral and it wasn't just a self-given title. He didn't wear the uniform or have the symbol pinned on his arm, but everyone knew who he was. After he arrived, it was like a whirlwind. Some deferred to him because of his rank, others because he had the numbers, but he swayed most of the unaffiliated pylons to follow his lead. Even some of the stronger ones joined under his banner. He immediately took charge of who he could and had everyone working on construction. Anyone who would help was given a job. Trenches were dug, walls were put up, and stone was dragged up from the ground and molded into place, all to entrench themselves as deep as they could. Hendricks wasn't privy to the meetings that took place, the talks between leaders, but he had eyes to see the outcome. Some were unhappy and voiced their displeasure loudly, but the killing stopped. The main argument against them was that the walls and everything they were building were going to be useless. No one knew what the test entailed. It could be one massive enemy or thousands of little ones. Some even thought combat wasn't a given, saying it could end up being a puzzle or something similar. Others claimed it would be a dungeon, as that was the only thing that made sense. Except it wouldn't be a normal dungeon that went deeper into the earth, but one that had floors heading upward into the sky. The tall monolith certainly allowed for such a thing, but that didn't make it a given. Throughout it all, more and more people arrived. Tens of thousands by the 2-week mark on the timer. 100,000 by the 1-week mark. Every day closer had thousands arriving. With 6 days left on the timer, another army of thousands marched in from the west. a group of 3 separate factions that traveled together. One came all the way from Canada. The other came from Yellowstone, with the last one coming from Denver. All 3 bordered the new mountain range that split the country in 2. Still, for all the faults that this meeting had and the fights that broke out, there was an underlying energy that refused to be stomped out. One positive out of all the bad: the missing persons. With everyone from all over conglomerate in one place led to everyone asking about people they knew. Friends or family that lived far away when the change hit. Asking if they saw them, if they knew anything about where they were. Most requests were met with sad shakes of the head or gestures of uncertainty. But rarely, there were gasps of surprise and tears of joy. Those were few and far between, but there were still uplifting to witness. It was at the 4-day mark when another faction rolled in that had everyone's heads turning. Every faction leading up until that point arrived on foot, marching in on land. But this one was different. They arrived on boats. They looked worse for wear and had many, many damaged parts showing along the hull, but the fact they were floating at all was what mattered. They essentially limped to the finish line, but they arrived all the same. Another 1,000 arrived. A small drop in the total of the crowd gathered, but it was a marvel to witness firsthand. Everyone coming together to face whatever this test was the system threw at them. Even with all the tension, Hendricks couldn't help but get excited. Chapter 262, line for nobles. Chris. Well, that was close. Austin whistled as our boats ran ashore. The last 3 days had people plugging holes, shoveling water, or otherwise spreading themselves thin trying to keep the things afloat. The ease of the first day of travel lulled us into a false sense of security. What followed was the harrowing task of trying to defend the boats from sinking, and we were not without failure. We lost 3 along the journey. The saved the supplies and they, along with the people, were spread out over the remaining vessels, but it was still rather uncomfortable to be packed in so tightly. I delegated a considerable amount of manpower to keep the 2 boats filled with bison alive. Not only because Sarah was on one of them, but because there was no way I was going to be packed in with the enormous beasts. The smell of damp fur, musk, and otherwise unmentionables. Yeah, no way in hell. That being the case, along with the fact it was one of the heaviest boats that hauled the most in terms of cargo, everyone was in agreement to shift forces to defend it. The 3 of us up front did our best to head off anything too strong, but that was easier said than done. The river was a lot bigger than it used to be, both in depth and width. I wasn't sure of the dimensions of the river from before, but it was a monster now. Miles upon miles wide in some places, and so deep my aura couldn't reach the bottom. It was difficult to parse through rushing water with it, but still, I'd covered nearly an entire town with it before, to not even reach the bottom? Our main foe wasn't even fish. It was snakes, lizards, insects, or other amphibians that inhabited the various places we passed through. The assault was nearly endless in some places, and I hadn't slept for days by the time we arrived. No one had, as it was all hands on deck. Literally. The good part, even if it didn't feel like it, was there were a lot more settlements along the river than first thought. There were numerous cities along it before, as it was one of the major waterways in the country, but we weren't sure how many of them survived the change. It was relieving to see, both for civilization's sake and for humanity's sake. It would have been awfully depressing to go through all of the old cities along the river and only seen ruins. The additional places to resupply also helped. We had loads of food and enough to last us, but it was always nice to get something fresh. Dried meats and hardtack were unpleasant. We still hunted, and most of our meals involved fish caught from the river or things we killed assaulting the boats. But the fresh fruits and vegetables were a nice touch. Jonathan was gushing about future trade opportunities and how the river would be a goldmine in terms of merchants and whatnot, but that was still far off in the future. Land-based caravans and traders were only just beginning to surface. I doubted river travel, let alone ocean travel, would come anytime soon if what we experienced was anything to base it off of. Most of our trade was still done through our pylon, where everything cost an arm and a leg. The stones we bought to finish up our walls nearly beggared us. And it wasn't like they were degrade granite or anything. They were normal, if a bit stronger, stone. Gather everyone up. We need to find a place to settle down for the next few days and find a place to rest. I said tiredly. I didn't expect so many people. What an understatement that was. I expected a large group, but not this many. Everywhere I looked there were people. Some groups even had banners or flags. I knew that faction unity would drive people to group together, similar to how the orders like to stand out with their badges. But this was something else. Some were even all wearing the same color like an organized army. It had been 2 years, nearly on the dot with the timer and all, but still, this was unexpected. The breakdown of nationalism was a foregone conclusion, but I expected it to take a little longer. And maybe not. When was the last time I thought like that? Seeing ruins and overgrown infrastructure made it feel like a lot more time had passed. Sophia, coordinate with Marcus and find out what he plans to do, I said and watched her run off to where his boat parked. There was no point in anchoring them and we just ran them into land. Austin walked up with a face of mischief. One I'd seen often before. I held back a heavy sigh. It was funny to think the same man lectured me on how to behave at this little gathering. I'm gonna go exploring, he said mischievously, more like sleuthing. Tell me if you find anything useful, I said and didn't stop him. With so many people around, it would be easy enough to blend in and gather whatever intelligence he could. I couldn't, as other things needed my attention and a much-needed rest was in order, but he and a few others had orders to gather what they could. I had no doubt Marcus was doing the same. Neither of us wanted to come in hot and throw our weight around. We knew far too little for that. I was strong and I knew he was too, but for all we knew there could be hundreds just like us. Some could already be at D rank. Unlikely, but within the realm of possibility. Finding a spot along the river was easy enough as our entrance seemed to dislodge the people near it. For whatever reason, the sight of nearly a dozen boats ramming ashore had people moving out of the way. People still lined both sides with either lines in the water or traps set, but those were easy enough to work around. Now the only thing to do was wait for word to come back. I hoped things weren't too complicated, but with so many people around, I somehow doubted that. Over 100,000 people, over 100 different pylons and dozens of factions? I repeated to make sure I heard correctly. Yes, sir. A member of the scouts responded. Sir was pushing it, but I couldn't get them to go any less. It was still better than my lord, so I sucked it up. You should see them all, Chris. From all over the continent. Austin said excitedly, well, the eastern portion of it at least. He added like an afterthought, do any of them have a better idea of what's going on? I asked the most pressing question first. That was the highest priority of those sent out. Finding out what we were up against was critical. No, sir. No one knows. Speculation is running wild, and it's only getting worse as the clock ticks down. The scout said. Austin. I swung over to him with hope. Nada, he said. Some of the ideas are funny, though. Some people are crazy. Then what's with all the construction? If we don't know what we're up against, how are they preparing for it? It was hard to miss the large construction project going on. It wasn't taking place everywhere, but a large portion of the people had something to do with it. The wall being built was mainly earth-reinforced with wooden beams, but it was still a wall. That's courtesy of someone they call the Admiral. Austin said, word is the dude's actually an admiral. Or used to be, as I doubt the government survived. The scout took over after Austin finished. His faction's based along the East Coast and most of the forces under his command are former military. He holds the largest army gathered, but most are low E rank. A small few are higher than that, and any descriptions of the man's powers are strictly guarded secrets. We don't even know if he's a mage or a warrior. The scout almost seemed angry that they couldn't figure it out. I gathered he had the largest army when nearly half of those gathered are helping him with construction, I remarked. Not all involved fall under his banner. The scout corrected. Smaller pylons or those without a strong backing are following his command. The reasons vary, but we believe it's due to his former rank along with the numbers at his back. Also because they think falling under him will deter other, less tact factions from bullying them around. Is he in charge then? I questioned. No. Both Austin and the scout answered that question. While he has the most people behind him, he's not solely in charge. Austin said, Some of the other leaders are less than inclined to follow someone else. Them being willful and all. As he said, most don't want to follow someone else. There have been meetings between the various leaders, but information on those is scarce. Not many were allowed to participate. Only the highest leveled were, and that's a point of contention among other pylon owners. The scout said, "What? Do they feel left out?" I grumbled. Yes. I knew this gathering wouldn't be the most coordinated, but it was shaping up to be better than I feared. Squabbling children in place of pylon owners that I pictured was still a possibility, but it didn't seem like the case right now. Was there anything else you figured out? I asked. There's to be a meeting tomorrow. It was set long before we arrived for 3 days before the test starts. We gather that it's to coordinate and discuss how to proceed. The scout said. That was good news? Depending on if it was as portrayed. They could say the meeting was for anything they wanted. It was still up in the air if it would be useful. Do they expect any more to arrive, or are we the last? No one knows for certain. The only way to tell is to figure out a place where no one is from. The scout said. That being said, no representatives of Florida have arrived and the Southwest is awfully light. Anything farther than Arkansas or eastern Texas is missing. We did come from quite far away, I thought. They could still be on their way. Still, not many coming from Texas was strange. They had millions of people and was a heavily populated state before. One whose population I doubted would cower from a fight. Was there another obelisk to the south they went to instead? It was highly improbable that this was the only one in the world. If the test we faced relied solely on us, a small portion of the world, to complete it, that would hardly be fair. Furthering that line of thought, would everyone need to pass? Majority? Or was it fine if only one did? So many unknowns were frustrating. How do we get ourselves an invite to this discussion? Does Marcus have any ins? He has more knowledge of what goes on in the South than we do. I asked. Austin chuckled. Not that much more. He's never been this far south, and I doubt he's even heard of most of the factions here. The reservation and the Heartlands Alliance, sure, since they border him, but the rest. He shrugged, leaving the thought unanswered. Okay, how else do we get a slice of the pie? I questioned. We're still working on that. The scout said, we have an idea of what is required, but want to confirm it before moving forward. Oh, I asked, and what might that requirement be? You have to be a noble. So the segregation begins. Chapter 263, Deserves to be Here. Chris. Normally, when discussing or deciding on a course of action back home, I involved the council. They held different viewpoints and had insights I wouldn't come up with on my own, and also opened up ideas that I wouldn't have thought of. I couldn't do that now. Being the only noble of our group, I had to walk in alone into whatever this turned out to be. Marcus would be there, as he was also a noble, but that was different. Being alone at the meeting wasn't what scared me. I'd faced down things much scarier than the meeting people. It was what came after that did. When making decisions by committee or in groups like we usually did, it made the burden lesser somehow. Like it didn't all fall on my shoulders. The number of people we lost against the demons still wasn't something I was comfortable with, and this would only be a repeat of what happened then. It was my orders that resulted in people dying, and that was a tough pill to swallow. I knew it was necessary, and that if pushed into a corner, I'd do it again, but that revelation didn't make doing it feel any less difficult. That being said, this meeting was more than just my own faction. I wasn't sure how many nobles were among the crowd, but based on how hard it was to become one, I doubted there was a lot. I put it at a maximum of 24, and that was pushing it. If that was true, that would mean 24 people would dictate the lives of over 100,000. That was the optimist speaking, as everyone falling in line and going along with what was decided was unlikely. But theoretically, my decisions would either save or kill a great number of people. It wasn't something I was comfortable with. At least the people who followed me from Frostheim put their trust in me and had a choice in doing so. The people from elsewhere didn't. They didn't know me. They didn't choose to follow me. Nor did they believe in me. But I would dictate what they would do anyway. A touch narcissistic. I knew it wasn't all up to me and that my mind was diving into the rabbit hole of worry, and I blamed Abigail for that. We had the rest of the day and the morning before the meeting to talk through and discuss what might happen. Her worries had rubbed off on me and had me thinking like the burden had fallen entirely on my shoulders. It isn't all on me. Stop thinking like that. Abigail explained in great detail everything that could go wrong, and it sent my head into a spiral. Listening to her probably wasn't the best decision right now. You look fine, stop stressing. The cause of all my worries said. Well, if someone hadn't gone through the trouble of listing everything that could go wrong, I wouldn't be. Abigail chuffed. Welcome to my life. Why do you think I'm so high-strung all the time? I didn't answer and looked myself over in the mirror one last time. Abigail's thin water wall worked perfectly to see my reflection. This being an important meeting and all, I had to dress the part. I still wasn't wearing the fancy clothes Marcus was because those were mighty uncomfortable, but I did step it up a bit. With the rare parts and hides I brought back with me from my trip, my clothes were all made from things I personally killed. It gave me a small sense of accomplishment even though I knew that no one else would care. I wasn't one to care about fancy dyes or coloring, but someone else had worked out which herbs and berries could be used to make them, and it was a waste not to take advantage of that. Most of the outfit was a deep blue while the rest was midnight black. If the skin of the beasts hadn't already been black, there would have been no way to dye it that dark. That wasn't all either. Similar to Austin getting me a signet ring, all of my family thought it would be funny to get me gifts congratulating my rise to nobility. They were mostly all in good humor, but there were a few that had more practical uses. Sam and Ashley, being the leatherworkers they were, said, "Now that you're a noble, you need clothes befitting a lord." I wasn't sure how long it took them to whip up, but they created the fanciest set of clothes I'd ever seen that still looked functional. There wasn't an overcoat that restricted movement. There wasn't a tie that felt like I was being strangled. None of the normal conventions for fancy, upper-class clothes was followed. Instead of superfluous additions or expensive accessories, the outfit was instead stunning in another way. The clothes themselves were made out of a D-grade feline I killed. The accents were done in either wolf or elk, I wasn't sure. In addition to the powerful base material, the craftsmanship was on par with the materials used. I didn't have the greatest eye when it came to leatherworking or tailoring, but even I could see they were well made. There was even an artistic touch they added. Taking inspiration from the rune strings of my hammer, they were fashioned all over the tunic in fancy loops and curves of embroidery. They weren't done in gold and there wasn't an emphasis put on them, but they stood out all the same and it looked awesome in my opinion. The runes weren't functional, but they still looked cool. And the last bit to tie it all together was the fur. It was the middle of summer and it was roaring hot, but I liked to wear them anyway. I didn't wear my cloak, as that would be entirely overkill, but I allowed myself the small accents. It was a dash of white to brighten the entire thing up and contrast against the black. They were mostly restrained to the upper shoulders and the upper and lower portion of the belt without all the additional layers I would usually be wearing, but they still tied the entire outfit together. "Now you look lordly," Abigail proclaimed, and I had to admit I did. My hair was cut and styled and my beard was trimmed. The days of looking like a hobo were gone. Taking a deep breath, I left our camp and ventured toward the towering obelisk in the sky. Sadly, I left my hammer behind. It was the wrong foot to start off by bringing it to the meeting. Instead, I had an axe on my belt. I was still technically armed, and I had used axes before, but it felt wrong to be without my hammer, but I sucked it up anyway. Seeing the obelisk had been wondrous at first. The fact it just randomly appeared was both wildly fascinating and scary at the same time. Most of the area toward the center was cleared away, as if by some unspoken agreement not to get too close to the obviously alien construction. The construction of the wall happened a couple hundred yards away in every direction, which left most of the people situated on the outside of the future wall. While some thought that the obelisk would be the source of our troubles and we would need to face monster coming from within it, an equal number of people thought that we would need to protect it and monsters would come from the opposite direction. That being the case, the wall was confusing at first until we heard that it was built to defend from both directions. There were stairs leading up to the wall's walkway on both sides, but I was told that one side would be destroyed depending on which direction we were assaulted from, which was a surprising level of foresight. The only problem was without a confirmed direction, traps were mostly meaningless. If we trapped the land outside the wall and we were in the situation of protecting the obelisk, that would be fine. But if we ended up being wrong and had to fight on the other side, we would end up standing in the minefield. Trapping both sides was equally stupid, as that guaranteed that we would be stepping on our own traps. Passing through all the various faces made how serious this was settle in. People from every race and creed were represented, as this would be a major point in history. Win or lose, things would change. It was also overwhelming to see the sheer amount of people present. I'd never been somewhere with this many. Not even national football games or any other professional sport had this many people attend. I tried to look at the various banners or faction badges, but they all ended up blurring together. There were so many different ones that it was hard to keep them all separate. Blues, reds, oranges, greens, every color under the rainbow. Deer, wolves, bears, swords, axes, every kind of sigil to go with it. It was a lot to take in. Walking through it all took a fair bit of time. It was row after row of tents, earth domes, camps, and more. Finally, piercing through it all left me with a clear view of the obelisk from base to tip. I'd seen it from afar, as it was hard to miss, but it was something else up close. "It's truly something, isn't it?" Marcus said. I was so lost taking it all in I hadn't felt him approach. Admittedly, there were far too many people around for my normal method to work. The days on the boat refined my aura sense enough to tell when people approached me, but that was well and truly shot with the crowd being what it was. It was relieving to see him. We didn't get to talk much during the 5 days, but we had fought together, and that was just as good. It is. I knew it was alien before we got here, but looking at it only confirms that. I said, and he only nodded. Any idea who else we're going to see? Marcus thought for a moment. I wouldn't be surprised if someone from the Heartlands Alliance achieved it. I doubt many in the faction could, but at least one is likely. I don't think any from the reservation cares enough to do it, so I doubt anyone from there. Other than that, your guess is as good as mine. I know little of other factions' pylon development. The only pylons I knew about didn't have barons except for one. Ashton was too busy trying to correct his city, and Lakeshore didn't have anyone powerful enough. We still knew too little about our southern neighbor, but I knew they didn't have the strength for the upgrade. I also wasn't sure if they were even here. It wasn't like I was able to pick them out of the crowd, even if they were. Mountainside for sure has a baron, I said. It wasn't confirmed, but it was a hunch I felt confident in. Any idea which one's them? Marcus waved at the small gathering of people ahead of us. I'd stopped at the outer ring to take in the obelisk while others moved on ahead. There was no one barring entry, so some probably weren't nobles, but it looked like most were. Their power was nothing to scoff at, but it was difficult to get a good read. I got enough that I could guess at everyone's affinity, but little else other than that. Knowing where Mountainside was made me confident that whoever ran it was of the earth affinity, but there were a few people that fit that description. My mind pictured a short, stocky man with a thick beard, but that was just my imagination thinking about dwarves. Everything we knew about the settlement made me think of a dwarven kingdom. It was named Mountainside. It was built into the side of the mountain, and the ruler most likely had an earth affinity. It was hard not to think of them. Unsurprisingly, there were no dwarves I could see, so that eliminated that option. There were a few people who felt heavily like the earth, and even one that felt even stronger than that, but I would be guessing as nothing else stood out. One person did catch my eye, but not because he felt like the earth, but because he felt like a storm. I remembered Tracy's description of her city lord, and I'd bet money the man I was looking at was him. Lightning robes, haughty expression, and an arrogance that was nearly tangible. "Do you know him?" Marcus caught my gaze and looked at the man in question. "No, but I've heard of him. Someone I was in the tutorial with runs one of his cities that we traveled through in the beginning," I said. "Isn't that the man who conquered Chicago?" Marcus asked. "I think he calls himself the Stormbringer." I snorted at the gaudy, self-proclaimed title. "I think so, but I don't know the exact details. I do know he's a bit self-centered and arrogant. I was told I wouldn't like him, and I can see why." Our conversation was ended by loud clapping to get everyone's attention. The man responsible stood near the center of where everyone gathered, and his posture was ramrod straight. He also had the hair of someone clearly in the military, which made who he was rather obvious. Black, short buzzed hair. An outfit that resembled something closer to armor than what I expected, and a no-nonsense face. It was clear the man was used to being in charge. "Thank you all for coming. We'll first ask everyone to display their title to make sure everyone here deserves to be here," he announced. Some gathered bristled at that. I knew some did it because they didn't have the title and they would be found out, but I knew others did it because they didn't like what he said for a different reason. What he said and the way he said it made it look like he was in charge, and it was clear not everyone was fine with letting him continue that. "Oh brother. Here we go. I can't wait to be done with this so I can go back home." I doubted I was the only one thinking it. One thing did stand out though, and I found his word choice curious. Deserves. He didn't say allowed or invited or anything along those lines, but deserved. Chapter 264, People of Importance. Displaying a portion of your status screen was easily done after knowing it was possible. During the tutorial, my family would show the whole thing, but it didn't take long to figure out that omitting sections or only showing a partial version was possible. It took longer to realize showing other people was possible than it was to find out that you could show portions. To display your status, all you had to do was think about doing it. Most things revolving around the system were like that. Intent played a major part in how you used it. The total amount of people gathered near the obelisk was well above how many nobles I estimated. I thought the absolute maximum would be around 24, and there were well over 50 standing in the clearing. We didn't even make it to showing the title before a voice spoke up. "Who put you in charge?" I didn't catch who said it, as it came from a cluster of people on the other side from where I stood. Even so, I doubted the man who spoke was the only one thinking it. The military man didn't seem surprised at the question. "No one. I'm just trying to establish a clear and concise gathering so that we can face what's coming to the best of our ability. And being a noble is required for that." This time I did catch who said it. The man wore a mix of plate and leather armor and didn't even try to disguise it otherwise. Marcus and I both forewent showing up wearing obvious armor, but some gathered didn't care and wore what they were comfortable in, armor being a popular choice. "Yes," the Admiral said. "If we allowed anyone with an opinion in, we wouldn't get anything done. We have just over 72 hours to come up with a plan of action, and we all know the consequences if we fail." "Do we though?" A man who felt like fire said. "This can't be the only obelisk in the world. If we fail, other areas could still pass." It wasn't the Admiral who answered this time. It was someone else. "Are you willing to leave that in the hands of someone else?" The man's hat gave him away as a Southerner. Well, that and the accent. "We pass here, we pass everywhere." A woman who felt a lot like Abigail spoke up next. "That's assuming it only requires one group to pass. What if it takes the majority to pass?" Clapping tore through and ceased the igniting conversation before it could go too far, and attention was brought back to the Admiral. "Speculating on that won't get us anywhere. We needed to set a requirement to attend the meeting, and being a noble is the best one. It shows not only personal power but the backing of a strong fighting force. Both will be required for what is to come, whatever it may be. Just 'cause we weren't suicidal enough to go for that upgrade, we're barred from having a say?" Another man said to a chorus of nods and some audible yes. "Look," the Admiral said. "Do you see how many people are out there? We can't allow everyone to be a part of this or nothing will get done. The cutoff has to be somewhere, and being a noble was the logical choice. Why not allow pylon owners? Why make it only nobles? Why not make it a level requirement? Why not?" I sighed internally. I could have guessed that it would turn out like this, but seeing it play out in action was somehow worse. There were 3 days before everyone here would fight for their lives, and the leaders were spending it bickering. I liked it better when things were so much easier. When the only thing I had to worry about was coordinating between one other pylon to fight, not hundreds. More people always made things more difficult. Enough! Oh, there was some heat behind that one. It seemed like everyone had gotten used to keeping their auras contained for the past 2 years, or at least partially contained, but that was said with some backing. The Admiral wasn't just a paper tiger either. There was genuine power behind his self-perceived level of importance. "Fine," he ground out. "We'll continue with those currently here. That should be more productive than forcing some people to leave." His concession was the only logical choice in my opinion. There was no way he was going to be able to force the people who weren't nobles to leave without force, and doing so would start the entire test off in a wonky position. Those who were arguing against him had smug smiles, while everyone else just looked on with blank expressions, uncaring. If I'd known that, I would have brought Abigail. We didn't both need to be here, but it would make it easier on me. I guess we should start with introductions, the Admiral said. You may call me the Admiral or just Admiral, either is fine. I run New Norfolk on the eastern coast. Hit introduction didn't tell me anything I didn't know already. Well, the name of his city was new, but it wasn't that hard to guess. A bit unoriginal, but I suspected there were hundreds of pylons named New Old City name. His faction was also on the nose, as he called it, the American faction. The next to go was another man I already knew. I'm the Stormbringer. I stifled a laugh. Chicago and most of the Midwest fall under my banner, and I lead the Stormlands. Not only was his own title pretentious, but the name of his faction was too. The introductions continued, but I certainly wasn't going to remember everyone's name. There were over 50 people, and I'd be lucky to remember half of them. Instead, I focused on the important ones. Determining importance was rather easy. It was how strong someone felt. There was a strong suspicion in my head that it correlated to those with noble titles, but I had no way to confirm that. Some could just be strong but hadn't elected to do the pylon upgrade yet. The next person with a level of strength above the rest was a woman. She had fiery red hair and reminded me a lot of Rachel. Not in looks, but in how explosive she felt. There was also a staff in her hand which marked her as a mage, but that could be forgiven. I'm Vanessa from Eternal Flame Falls. Her introduction was short and succinct. I liked it. No stupid titles or subtle brags about how much land she owned. I wasn't sure where Eternal Flame Falls was, but it shouldn't be hard to find out. We had our map packed away with us, and with a name like that, it should be easy enough to find. There were a few more that didn't matter before another person of importance came up. A man who looked older. It was hard to tell with stats, but the wrinkles betrayed his age. I am Patrick Staffords, from Harbor Deep and leader of the Great Lakes Alliance. On either side, hooked to his belt, two magnificent axes rested. The craftsmanship was on par with something Vincent could do. There weren't any runes decorating them, which was a shame, but they were pretty otherwise. Great Lakes? If he was somewhere near the lakes, then he was close to us. Depending on where, it would be another possible trade partner. The next person's accent threw me for a loop before I placed where he was from. It was nearly incomprehensible. Name's Vernon, he drawled. His voice was nice, but the words were hard. From Orleans and leader of the French Quarter. It was hard to tell his age just from looking. Dark skin tended to hide things like that better. He was also wearing an outfit with swirls of white and black, which played well with his skin. Without a visible weapon, I wasn't sure what type of class he was. Vernon was way too far away to consider trade. Not unless some kind of river access opened up quickly and Marcus could make it the length of the Mississippi River. Seeing how we were nearly scuttled without even going halfway, I doubted it would be soon. Next up was a group of 3 that stood together. 2 men and a woman. The first man to speak felt like a dormant volcano. He had strikingly black hair that looked meticulously taken care of and a well-trimmed beard. Travis Michaels, owner of Yellowstone and leader of the Yellowstone faction. The next man felt like the complete opposite of a volcano. It was like the airy and light-headed feeling of being too high up in the air combined with a forceful ripping wind. An odd combination. Devin from Mile High, or what used to be Denver. And, leader of the faction with the same name. Not one for public speaking, it seemed. At least he gave where his city was from. Some didn't even give so much as a hint. How the hell was I supposed to know where Harbor Deep was on a map? Sure, I could guesstimate near where the lakes were, but knowing where Denver was made it a lot easier. The last of the group stepped up. She was the one who felt most strongly of Earth, but it went more than that. Jonathan felt like the Earth, but this went deeper. More fundamental. She had rich brown hair tied back and out of her face, and she wore what appeared to be a normal shirt and pants. I couldn't tell the craftsmanship from so far away. Jayla Summerfield from Mountainside. Ah, she's the leader. About as far away from a dwarf as you can get. She wasn't short by any means, taller than average for a woman, 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches, but it felt like she was taller for some reason. Something about her aura made it feel like she was standing higher than she was. She was my only Canadian compatriot. Ashton didn't come to the meeting as he wasn't a baron, and I didn't see anyone else I knew. There was word of settlements near Ottawa and more further east, but we didn't have any confirmation on that. The last we heard from Ashton was getting through the forests was impossible, and no word had come back from their capital. There were a few others that stood out, and I made sure to note down their names, but they were far enough away that I wasn't that interested in getting to know them. Whether through trade or war, we wouldn't be seeing them anytime soon. The next name I perked up for was one from the Heartlands Alliance. Marcus speculated that they had a baron somewhere in their midst, but wasn't able to put a name to his speculation. Michaela Stewart from Verdant Falls. The woman was similar to Patrick in that she was on the older side. The levels and stats did a lot to remove the obvious aging, but some things were still noticeable. The hints of crow's feet around the eyes. The not yet smoothed out wrinkles around the mouth. The woman was devoid of any other indicator of age. Her hair was lush and vibrant, and she stood straight and unbothered. If there was a baron inside the Heartlands Alliance, she seemed like the prime candidate to me. The reservation didn't send anyone to the meeting, but everyone was talking about their war party camped nearby. Besides the Heartlands Alliance, it seemed the Great Lakes Alliance was the next closest we had to worry about. There were 2 from New England that stood out. A man from Boston and a woman from New York City. Liam McConnell, leader and pylon owner of New Boston. The man's accent was heavy, and he was the only one to say explicitly they were the pylon owner. Everyone else just said leader. He wore mainly street clothes, unlike most of the others in some kind of armor, but he wore a weapon openly. A large great sword rested comfortably on his back, and he seemed skilled in its use. The other lady was of clear African-American descent, but she had freckles upon her face that lit up like stars in the night sky. It was unique and hard not to stare at as the woman introduced herself. Zuri Adeoye, leader of Empire City, formerly New York. There were a few more scattered about as well. Far enough south it would take nearly a year to get there. It wasn't long before it came to our portion of the circle. Marcus went first. Marcus Shieldwell from Twin City, what used to be Minneapolis and St. Paul. He didn't elaborate on his faction or anything besides his name and the name of his city. Now it was my turn. Christopher Zelensky, owner of Frostheim, north of Winnipeg. He kept it short. Saying we were north of Winnipeg was a bit of an understatement, but it was the closest landmark to go off of. We were pretty far north, and I didn't feel like explaining that. I also used the word owner for a reason. Only some chose to use it while others didn't. Some said leader, others just said they were from somewhere, but I felt owner was the best fit. Building the city and running the city was all firmly something me and my family did, so it felt right. I knew some who claimed ownership of a city did it because that was how they saw themselves and didn't spend the effort to build it. If others thought I used owner for the same reason as they had, that wasn't my fault. Trying to remember the names of everyone and their cities was remarkably difficult. I wanted to be able to mark them down on the map we had, but there were some that didn't give any clues, which made it difficult. There being over 50 also didn't help. The bickering in the beginning and the introductions ended up taking quite a bit of time. It didn't help the meeting already started in the late morning. By the time everyone was through introducing themselves and their factions, it was nearly noon. I caught the moment the timer ticked down from 4 days remaining to 3 and change. And with it came a notification. Seeing how I hadn't killed anything and there were only a few other times I'd gotten a notification chime for any other reason, I had a good guess for what it could be for. Opening it only confirmed my suspicion. Chapter 265, Introduction to the Blight. E-Rank Planetary Protections Assessment. Category, Introduction to the Blight. Description. Beginning when the timer hits 0, all obelisks placed around the world will open up and hordes of blight-touched denizens will burst forth from all sides. This horde of infected will venture forth seeking to consume and corrupt everything in its path. The wave will continue until either all defenders have perished or the horde is defeated. Assessment results. Passing this trial is contingent upon the performance of how the defenders deal with the horde sent against them. All 13 obelisks will be taken into consideration when determining the final outcome. Rewards for success. Continued planetary protection against beings and factions above E rank. Additionally, individual beings and factions will be rewarded on a case-by-case basis depending on their contribution and participation. Failure, cessation of planetary protections. We wish you the best of luck. May your spirit never be extinguished. Holy fuck. My words weren't alone, as most of the people gathered voiced similar sentiments. The notification was a lot to take in, and most were still staring wide-eyed into the air. The first thing that came to my mind was blight infected. I'd heard the term used before, but had never run into anything like it myself. I think someone mentioned a tutorial dealing with the blight. The second was the fact there were 13 of the obelisks around the world. It was an odd number that confused me at first. There was one here in the eastern portion of North America. There was probably one in the western portion. Another in Central America? That would be 3. Another in South America, probably 2 based on the size. Another 2 in Africa put the total at 7. One in Europe was 8. Would Australia get one? The Asian countries were the most populous. How would they be split up there? Would India get 2 based on sheer number of people? What about the island countries? Japan, the Philippines, and New Zealand were just a few off the top of my head, but there were countless others in Polynesia or Oceania. If Florida was anything to go off of, travel by way of ocean was all but impossible at this stage. Would they be relegated to be bystanders while everyone else fought? Admittedly, my mind immediately trying to puzzle out where the other dozen obelisks were probably wasn't the best use of brain power. There were so many other things I should have focused on first, like what the fuck the blight was. Just as I was getting through the various thoughts and ideas I had after reading the notification, so was everyone else. What are we? How? We should. Everyone began talking over one another, and it was impossible to make out what was said. The people who came in groups or stood near one another turned to each other to discuss while everyone else was left to add their voices to the crowd. Quiet down, everyone. The Admiral tried to get the talking to stop and import some order, but even he was ignored. He had to call out a number of times before everyone settled down into something manageable. In light of this new information, why don't we all take a minute to confer with our own factions? He announced. It was obvious he wasn't in the position he wanted to be in. He seemed like a man who liked holding all the cards, and now that a bomb had been dropped on him, he needed to take a minute to figure things out. It was a good sign in a leader and one I wanted to do myself. I didn't wait for anyone to agree or voice opposition, as I needed to wrap my head around this, and the first thing I needed to do was find someone who had a tutorial that involved the blight. As I departed back toward our camp, most of the leaders were doing the same. Some stuck in groups, but most went off toward their own sections alone. The walk back to our spot was faster than before as people got out of my way when they saw me coming. It was like they could tell I wasn't in the mood to shimmy through a crowd and opened a path for me to walk through. Sophia, I called once I reached where we set up camp. The blonde came running at hearing her name. Yes, my lord. I need you to find everyone who knows, has heard of, or has dealt with the blight or blight-infected creatures. Specifically, those who had tutorials pertaining to it. I ordered. While she was doing that, I would gather those of the council who made the journey. Abigail especially, as she spent the most time with the information books we had. We didn't bring them with us, but she'd read through all of them enough times to know what they said. Before she turned to run away, I stopped her. And Sophia, see if anyone had tutorials or system descriptions with the word denizen in them. The distinction was probably nothing, but it bugged me. The notification stating the description of our tutorial was a while ago, and so much had happened since then and now, but I didn't remember it using the word denizen. If I remembered correctly, it said enemies, monsters, or creatures, not denizens. Denizen. I feel like I remember reading about that somewhere, Abigail said quietly. Gathering the council had been easy as most of them were already together when I came back. They knew that whatever I learned at the meeting would need to be discussed. Sophia's job was much harder, and we enlisted a few more to go around asking. From the word, it sounds like it won't be monsters sent against us, but rather people, Jonathan said. People? You mean we're gonna fight infected humans? Like some kind of zombie apocalypse? Austin, who should have been more worried, was nearly vibrating in excitement. It doesn't have to be humans. Now that we know other races are out there, it could be anyone. Denizen doesn't immediately imply human. Jonathan responded. So instead of beasts who we can outreason, we're going to be fighting something that can think. I surmised. That depends on what this blight does. Abigail said. It could remove the capacity to reason. They also won't be attacking with fangs or claws. It will most likely be a weapon of some kind depending on what we're up against. Hal chimed in. Similar to the waves of goblins, then? That seems to be the most likely scenario. That makes everything harder. Fighting beasts was something I'd done extensively. There were the occasional waves of goblin or humanoid enemies, but they were few and far between. There was also our fight against the Mindbreaker, which was fought mainly against other humans. Fighting against someone with a weapon was inherently different than fighting against beasts. The level of skill involved also mattered. Sophia opened up our tent flap and signaled that she was ready. With a nod, I ushered her in with the people she managed to gather. There were nearly a dozen that came walking in. Some were part of an order, with the patches they implemented worn on their armor, while others were just volunteers. You? I pointed at the one who followed after Sophia first. What do you know of the blight? The man shrank back a touch at everyone staring at him so intently. After they walked in, conversation was cut off and everyone turned to look at the newcomers. Yes? Sir, my tutorial was about the category blight outbreak. He stammered at first but found his footing. When he said the category of his tutorial, a few others in the line nodded like they had a similar tutorial. We were told that the blight comes from the void. Another term that was used instead of blight-infected was void-touched. It's a disease that corrupts the mind and turns you mad. The man stated. So it's demonic? I asked. No, he said firmly. Demon energy can corrupt and taint, but it seeks to turn everything demonic in nature. The blight only seeks to consume and destroy. If I had to describe it better, I'd say it's eldritch rather than demonic. You? I pointed to the next one in line. Do you have anything to add? No, sir. Bryce and I were in the same tutorial. I pointed at the next person. We were told that it was the antithesis of life. While creation seeks to expand and thrive, the blight seeks the opposite. It was also said that there's a constant war going on to keep the edges of the universe from falling to it. So what? It's some kind of virus? Austin asked. I think it's more than that. Abigail said. It sounds like what games depicted as abyssal creatures or eldritch horrors. The things that seek out life and destroy it. Austin looked shocked and his mouth opened slightly in disbelief. My reaction was similar but better contained. What? She defended. When our world turned into a video game, I studied up. We were both surprised that she knew what an eldritch horror was, let alone abyssal creatures. Abigail wasn't a big gamer, which made her use of the words so surprising. Fair enough, I said. Where does that leave us for what to expect? The description said blight-infected, and we determined earlier that denizen probably meant a race of some kind rather than monster. From that, I think it's safe to assume the obvious. Austin said cheerfully. We're going to be facing an unknown race driven mad by eldritch horrors who may or may not be able to plan and reason, and who will more likely than not be using weapons of some kind, Hal added. Perfect. Just perfect. I think we should note the reason behind the test we were given. Abigail speculated. This is the first test since the tutorial, the first time that the system has intervened directly. It should be noted that the first thing we're up against is this blight or void-touched, and if there's a constant war going on, then there's probably a deeper meaning behind why this test is first. The category of the notification clearly states, Introduction to the Blight. Is any of that even useful? Austin waved a hand dismissively. We've barely stepped past being H-rank humans, and are only a few ranks above being useless. Why would it matter which test we get first? I'm just saying that there could be a deeper reason behind it. Abigail defended. None of that is important right now. I said, deeper meaning or not, it doesn't change the course at hand. We need to plan around a protracted battle with things that can possibly reason. Best case scenario, they charge at us like everything else has before. Worst case, they plan and test our defenses looking for a way through. If it's the latter, I paused. We need a much better cooperation between factions. Everyone nodded at that. Telling them how the meeting went was one of the first things I did. Not only did it detail how various factions viewed one another, but it also gave us a chance to mark down where people were from. The first to break the silence was Austin. But you all missed the most important part of the notification. Austin grinned mischievously. I was right. There is a reward. Don't all praise me at the same time. It's okay to spread it out a bit. Chapter 266, Peopleologist. Austin. Austin and Hal stood and watched as Chris and Abigail made their way back toward the obelisk and the meeting they were set to attend. After giving everyone a few hours to discuss the new information, there was another gathering of the top dogs to plan. It's some bullshit, Austin muttered. That's what that is. Bullshit. Hal glanced at him. Did you even want to go? Austin kicked the grass. No, God no, but it would have been nice to be asked. Hal didn't respond as he knew that Austin didn't actually want to go. The silence didn't last long though. It never did with Austin. What do you think they're going to decide on? Austin questioned. I don't know. Hal said honestly. The best choice would be to disregard faction lines and group everyone into more of an army-like structure. Shields with shields and bows with bows. Austin audibly laughed at that. Yeah, I know. Hal pushed his shoulder. I don't think that'll happen either. I'm just glad there haven't been any fights between the leaders yet, Austin said. There's still time, Hal said. How many brawls did you see when you went exploring? Austin shrugged. A few. But that's to be expected with a crowd of this size. Less than I expected, honestly. The calm before the storm, Hal commented. Everyone's probably too busy worrying about the giant alien pillar with the ticking timer. Both took a second to look at the obelisk after it was mentioned. You know, this could be our last days, Austin started suggestively. And there's awfully plenty of fish in the nearby sea if you catch my meaning. He even added an eyebrow wag at the end. Speak for yourself. I stand hundreds of yards away from any fighting. With the big man out front, I doubt any of them will even reach the back line. Hal joked. You, on the other hand, get up and personal with a sharp stick. Oh, come on, Hal. You're not getting any younger, Austin jabbed. Hal visibly grimaced. Oh, God. The words sounded like my mother, but they were coming out of your mouth. Hal shivered a bit thinking about it. And that argument doesn't work anymore. I'm barely 30 and with my vitality, I'll live for almost 300 years. Longer after I evolve. Oh, there's always time argument. How long have you been riding that one? Austin snarked. Hal had stood by that argument for as long as the question was asked. Just because you say it sarcastically doesn't make it untrue. Fine, I'll leave it alone. Austin shook his head. I've been striking out lately anyways. Hal chuckled. You? Striking out? Who'd have thought? Now that's just hurtful, Austin said. But, I'll have you know it wasn't because of me. Hal looked at him suspiciously. Or because of anything I said or did. Austin added quickly. Okay, I'll bite. If not for that, why have you been striking out? Hal caved and asked the question Austin obviously wanted him to. Great question, my Padawan. I'll tell you. He nodded sagely. I noticed the change while traveling through the world with only a backpack and my own 2 feet. Ah, Jesus, I take it back. Hal interrupted. Nope. It's too late now. You asked and I shall answer. Austin said. Now, where was I? Oh yes, traveling around and seeing the sights. The opportunities were thin at first, but then I chanced upon Marcus and the plight of his people. Hal sorely regretted asking. Being the magnanimous and chivalrous man I am, I stopped to aid them against their foe. Can we maybe skip ahead? I already know this part. If you keep interrupting it will only take longer. But fine, I'll skip ahead. Austin said. So, there I was in a rebuilding city. The fights were being handled and our offensive had stalled. With little else to do but rest and recover, Where else was a man to go but a tavern? They didn't have much, but it was better than sitting alone. They also didn't have any beer, which was mightily unfortunate. Still, I made do and the opportunities presented themselves. But as time went on, I noticed a change from how it used to be. It took a while to pinpoint what it was, but once I figured it out, it all made sense. Hal was surprised Austin was getting to the point so quickly. With the onset of the system and levels, there was tangible power for the first time. And with power came a change in the subconscious. A self-confidence that had been missing appeared. Without petty insecurities and a growing self-assurance, I noticed an increase in the number of strikeouts. Hal smiled. So you're saying with an increased inner confidence, fewer women wanted to sleep with you? Austin's face soured. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds bad. And since when did you become a psychologist? I don't need to be a psychologist when I'm already a pleologist. Hal pointedly ignored the bait and did not ask what a pleologist was. He suspected it was going to be another lengthy and completely absurd explanation. I would have thought that the fact you are scoring less would upset you, but it doesn't seem like it does. Hal pointed out. Austin smiled widely. It would if it wasn't so damn hot. Nope, not touching that. Hal immediately said. What can I say? Confidence is attractive. Austin said. It also has the added benefit of making them less clingy. Oh, heaven forbid you actually settle down, Hal said sarcastically. Austin gasped like the very thought was painful. Settling down would eventually be in the cards, but not for a while. There was still so much to see and experience. Finding a wife and having children could wait until then. It wouldn't be bad to have a companion to explore with, though. Going at it alone had its own nuance, but it got lonely quick. Austin guessed the feeling would diminish as he aged, but for now, it was still something that dragged on him when he was alone for long enough. For some reason, thinking of exploring alone brought up Rachel in his head. She'd gone off in search of a place to forge her core, and it had been months since anyone had last seen her. Hal, where's your mother? Austin asked. Oh, didn't like that. Hal's face scrunched up. Jumping from women you sleep with directly to my mom upsets me. That's not what I mean, Austin defended. It's just that I expected to see her here. Plus, we're not technically related. Not by blood, at least. Stop. Not another word. Hal clenched his fists. The odds that Hal would be able to actually hit him were slim, but Austin stopped pushing. Hal, that's gross. She's my aunt and like, twice my age. I'm just ruffling you up, Austin said to calm the man down, which seemed to work based on the unclenched fists. Hal took a few breaths. I don't know, actually. I thought we'd see her by now. Is the stone still intact? Austin asked. The only way to communicate over long distances they had found so far relied on paired stones. It was severely limited and could only be used once, but they were better than nothing. If a stone broke, it meant the person was in trouble. Everyone who left carried a few with them that meant different things and were marked accordingly. One was meant to signal the city was under attack and to come back urgently. Another meant come back but wasn't urgent. Another was if the person was in trouble and needed help. That was about as sophisticated as they could get with such a system. Hal shook his head. It's still fine. Then there's nothing to worry about. She still has a couple of days. Austin said cheerfully. Rachel. Rachel sat surrounded by people on all sides attempting to meditate, but it was fruitless. It was hard to get into the right state of mind while surrounded by so many people. Especially people she didn't know all that well. The Eternal Flame faction had been great and most were welcoming, but there were always a few bad apples in any group. She hadn't had to fight any of them outside a few spars, luckily. They strictly controlled access to the resource she needed, and that was one of the only reasons she played along. Rachel wished she had the sturdy power of Chris, so she didn't have to deal with their ordeals and could just power through the obstacles, but she didn't. Instead, she had to play along and do what was asked of her. Still, it wasn't all bad, and she made some new friends. The new burning strength inside of her also helped. It felt like an ever-burning red-hot coal now sat at her core, constantly giving off heat and power. A raging bonfire inside her chest at all times. The forging process wasn't too harsh. Most of the pain came from internalizing that much fire mana and of such potency, but being singed wasn't that bad. Playing with fire tended to burn if one wasn't careful, and she'd experimented enough to grow used to the sensation. Fire sprouted from her fingers and danced around as she waved her hand to and fro. The ease was like nothing else. She practiced with her mana daily, and she was proud of her ability to manipulate it, but after forging her core, it was like nothing else. It was so intuitive. Vanessa was the only one who could compare in terms of pure skill, and it was nice to have someone close to her ability. It was different than temperature sparring with Chris. Playing against her own element was more exciting, and it was much harder. Ice and fire were natural opposites, and it didn't take any large amount of skill to have them battle against one another. Just introducing the two mana types to each other would have them naturally clash. Fire versus fire had an intricacy that fascinated her. Rachel idly wondered when her family was going to show up. They were cutting it close with how much time was left. There was no doubt in her mind that they wouldn't come. This was too important not to. "Rachel!" A voice pulled her out of her musings. "You said you were from Frostheim, right?" Michael came walking over from his meeting with Vanessa. He wasn't quite the second in command, but he was high up in the command structure. The Eternal Flame faction wasn't structured the same as Frostheim. It wasn't ruled by one large family. Vanessa was its clear leader, but the positions under her were less clear. It didn't help that they fluctuated depending on power. It was a bit odd when she first met them, but it made sense in the long term. With levels and personal power being one of the main things people sought, it made sense that it was how rank was established. Only it was so much different than home. Abigail wouldn't suddenly be dethroned if someone out-leveled her. "Yes, that's right," Rachel said. "Are they here?" It was hard to keep the hope out of her voice. While it was nice to get out of the stuffy north and explore, she missed her family. Rachel knew her boy would be among them, and she was dying to see him. Brayden didn't care for violence after what happened to Kyle, and most likely stayed home, but she knew Hal would be along for the ride. Hal, like Rachel, leaned into combat rather than away from it after what happened. Vanessa just got back from the leaders' meeting and said a Christopher covered in fur from Frostheim was there, Michael said. It was funny to hear him described that way. "What else did she say about him?" Rachel prodded with a smile. "Not much. Most of the conversation was on what we were going to do, but she did note that he seemed powerful. She also said something about him bugged her." Michael shared freely. Rachel knew the feeling but had long gotten over it. It was based on their affinities being polar opposites. Rachel stood quickly. "Do you know where they're camped?" I think they're still next to the river in the north. They made quite the entrance coming in on boats." "Boats?" The boats comment was new, but she'd figure it out after talking with them. She brightened excitedly. She had so much to tell them. Chapter 267 Sections. "Chris, we need to put all our manpower towards defenses. We have less than 72 hours to build as strong a wall as possible to help us hold our ground. Why should I have my men help you? Pooling manpower just because you didn't bring enough people is hardly our fault. Why should we take the hit to help you? We should focus on building a trench rather than a wall. It's the better use of our limited time." Abigail leaned over from next to me and whispered, "Is this how the previous one went?" The meeting had kicked off much the same as the previous one had. People wanted their opinions to be heard, and differences between them led to arguments over who was right. It didn't help that the type of people at the meetings were the type to be so self-assured that they were right that listening to someone else was a foreign thought. There were a few outliers, people who were content to sit back and watch the show happen, but those were firmly in the minority. There were also those who just liked to hear themselves talk. By far the worst were the ones jockeying for superiority. They kept trying to leverage themselves as above others or tried to establish a pecking order. It was sad. "Yes," I whispered back using my aura. The practice with Gabriel really helped keep the volume contained. "Oh, cool. I didn't know you could do that." "Abigail." I wanted to cry. "Fuck me." Seeing me use my aura like that, she responded back in perfect volume in my ear like it was nothing. It was bullshit. I pointedly ignored telling her how long it took me to figure out. I knew she had a better control over mana than me, but I didn't think that it would extend to auras too. Maybe mine's harder to control because it's bigger. Yep, I was going with that to keep my dignity intact. Now that our conversation was a little more private, I went into a little more detail about what was happening. The one who wants the wall is from Kentucky, I think. They didn't show up with a lot of people from what I've heard, and the person denying him help is from New York. She has a lot more people than him but isn't willing to give them up. All this talk is only going to end one way. A voice cut through and overpowered those who were speaking. I turned to see it was my fellow Canadian who spoke up. The woman's expression was tired and angry. Talk of combining forces is all well and good, but we all know that's not going to happen. We should establish that now so we stop wasting time. The longer we stay here bickering like children, the less time we have to do what we should be doing. She wasn't yelling, but her voice was firm. And what should we be doing? The man's name eluded me, but I knew he wasn't a noble. He didn't have the power for it. Is that the leader of Mountainside? Abigail whispered. Yes. I like her. I don't know about you, Jayla. I remembered her name as she was close by, wheeled on the man who tried to confront her. But I will be doing everything I can so my people survive. Walls, trenches, traps. Everything we can before the timer runs out. I agree that's what we should be doing, the Admiral said. But we should consider those who aren't in the same position as us. His words were nice, but the way he said them annoyed me. I wasn't sure if he actually believed what he was saying or if he was just doing that to gather public sentiment. I wasn't good at differentiating the bullshit from the truth. Whatever it is, we should get on with it, the Stormbringer said dismissively. There was no way I was calling him that. I was pretty sure his name was Nick from what Tracy told me. Why don't you speak up? Abigail asked. I wanted to chuckle and shake my head, but I kept myself from showing anything externally. It's a waste of breath. Whether I say something or say nothing, it will not change anything. Can't you do what you did to Ashton at the mine? Intimidate them into making a decision. She asked earnestly. I could only do that because Ashton was weaker than me and already didn't want to fight. Some of the people here would become confrontational straight away if I did something like that, if they were weaker or not. And that doesn't mention the fact that I may not be the strongest person here. Some of these people feel threatening, and I know I'm not getting the best assessment. It's best to let this play out without interfering, I said. Someone here is stronger than you? She sounded so surprised by that, which was confusing. Probably, I stated. There are nearly a dozen people who have the Baron title here, or at least a dozen that I suspect have it. I may be strong, but I'm not the only one who has thrived in this new environment. It's impossible to tell without fighting, and that isn't something I want to do right now. Wow, she said, bewildered. I kept telling you guys that I've done nothing special. This is only the Eastern North America too. I wouldn't be surprised if there were dozens of people stronger than me in the world. Maybe hundreds, I said. But, you're you, she said. It always confused me that they were so assured by my strength. It made me consider when they started elevating what I could do in their heads. Yes, but I am one man on a planet of billions. If I did it, others have too. It is unlikely that I am the strongest in the world. I wasn't sure how many people survived the change, but that didn't change the statistics. Over 7 billion people were given the chance to level and gain power, and it would be delusional to believe that out of that many people, I did the best. Sure, I believed in my strength and knew what I'd done to accomplish it, but I also knew of the drive some people would have. If they disregarded ruling and chose not to own a pylon and spent every waking moment in a dungeon or out hunting down strong beasts, I wouldn't stand a chance. If someone here was confident that they were the strongest, it wouldn't be a surprise if they did exactly that. But since it hasn't happened, that means no one here believes themselves to be the strongest or isn't confident enough that they are. I said before, focusing back on the conversation outside as it was finally getting somewhere. I propose we section out the area around the obelisk into segments and assign a faction a portion to defend. Alliances or allies can have adjacent segments or combine and be assigned a larger segment. Another person I didn't know the name of said. That way everyone can be happy in that they're in control while also covering the obelisk as best we can. Of the ideas thrown out so far, that was by far the most reasonable and likely to happen. It took away the need to choose a leader, and that was the main hold-up for any other plan proposed so far. No one was willing to be under someone else, which made any plan that required firm central leadership a pipe dream. I knew the every man for himself idea wasn't the most tactically sound or even the best given our circumstances, but it was the only one that everyone here was going to agree on in the time we had remaining. "I agree," Nick said loudly. He was one of the firmest refusers when it came to the idea of taking orders from someone else. "I agree as well," Jayla said. "Most likely because it was the only way we were going to get out of here in any reasonable time frame." There were some grumbles by a few of the leaders, but the quick agreements gave the idea enough headway. The ball was rolling, and it would be hard to stop now. "I agree." I spoke up this time, adding steam to the idea. The proposed plan would let my faction do what it did best without having to rely on people we didn't know. It also gave my people the best chance of surviving. The section we were given couldn't be too large, as there were over 200,000 people gathered. Even standing in a circle hundreds of yards in diameter wasn't that much space per person. I would be able to head off the worst of it with Jonathan and Austin, while those behind me could stand tall on the wall we would build. It wouldn't be as strong as the one at home, but it would be better than nothing. Marcus would position next to us hopefully, and that would be another person to rely on. The man was stronger than I gave him credit for. He showed it as he cut apart anything that neared his boat with relative ease. The faction that would be on our other side would be an issue, but only worrying about one side was better than having to worry about two. The Admiral didn't seem happy about the proposed solution, but it was out of his hands now, and he had to roll with it to keep his momentum. "Then it's agreed. Someone bring a map so we can section it out." Someone behind the Admiral ran off to fetch one. The man was either an aide or someone under him, as his deference was clear. He came back within minutes of a detailed map of the area. It looked handmade too, and not like it was bought from the store. Maps were only available in the reward store, so getting them store-bought wasn't possible anymore, but it was still a surprise to see a man-made one. Cartography profession? Another profession that would be useful that we didn't have. That and curator were at the top of the list. In addition to more artificers. Miles was still tinkering and figuring out how magic could combine with technology, but he was confident in working it out. His main hang-up was we didn't have the manufacturing capability to make anything intricate like electronics. If it was machinery or metal pieces large enough that Vinny could forge it, we were golden, but computer chips and detailed electrical work was beyond us. That was where we were hoping magic would take over, but that was still being researched. The hope was to replace electronic signals that were reliant on technology we didn't have with magical ones we had to reinvent. I was still awaiting a breakthrough, but it wouldn't be long until he did. Let's just hope he doesn't die. The thought came suddenly. Miles wasn't the only one we had working on researching, but he was the only artificer. It would be a blow if he ended up dead. "Choose somewhere near the river," Abigail said. "I'll go see what the scouts gathered." I was a little jealous that she got to leave while I had to stay until the segments were divvied out, but I held it in. She would be able to sort through the reports so I wouldn't have to. Taking part in these meetings wasn't the only thing we had going for us right now. We decided on a three-pronged approach to gathering information. The first prong would be the obvious. Scouts that spread through the factions gathered looking for information. It was obvious because everyone was doing it. We saw a few lingering close to our camp, most likely using skills to see into places we didn't want them to. We drove them off, but there was nothing stopping people from trying. It wasn't worth it to set up wards to stop it, as that was a waste of time, effort, and resources. We didn't have anything secret, anyway. Seeing everyone else do it wasn't a surprise, and we had some members of Hal's order out and about. The second prong was through trade. We had merchants and traders going around with some of the surplus goods we brought seeking to trade or barter. That was mainly to see the resources everyone had access to and what they were willing to part with, but it was all information we could use. It was also an in. Traders could get closer and see behind the curtain, so to speak. The last prong was espionage. Scouts with the best stealth skills or those with the best sneaking ability were going around gathering information the other prongs wouldn't have access to. All three would come back with reports of what they found, and all of it would have to be compiled together. That was mainly Sophia's job. She and Abigail's assistant, Grace, The two of them were in charge of sorting through and picking out what was useful. Abigail, seeing that she wasn't needed here anymore, chose to go help them rather than stick around. Chapter 268, North of East. The map was rolled out and people crowded around for a good look. It showed the area well, and I was curious who and how the sections would be divided. Some factions were objectively stronger than others. The admiral had thousands behind him, while some of the lesser pylon owners had a few hundred and nowhere near high enough level to make up the difference. Frostheim as a whole had just under 1,000 defenders. Giving everyone the same area regardless of strength was stupid. People had naturally grouped into a rough circle when arriving for the meeting, and now that there was something to interact with and look at, that circle tightened. Being near the back screwed me. As the circle closed in, I was left staring at the backs of those in front of me. I was on the taller side for a man, taller than average at least, but that didn't give me enough height to see over people. I looked over at Marcus, who was in a similar predicament since he was standing next to me, and both of us nodded. I stuck out my hand and began forcing my way through. The first person looked around angrily, but even as he tried to push back, it did nothing. He quickly revised his decision after seeing that. The next fared mostly the same. It was rude to push through like this, but I wasn't going to be languished to the back. I was fine with taking a back seat during the bickering because it didn't matter in the end. The people who spoke up for whatever idea they championed would have accomplished the same thing if they'd said nothing. Sure, people got to hear you speak, but what did that achieve? Maybe that was purely my own opinion and people did look at them differently for having the courage to speak up. But that idea felt stupid and I hoped it wasn't true. To form an opinion on something that's stupid, Marcus forced his way through on my right. It was a deliberate decision on his part to part his own way instead of following mine, and I noticed it. As we got closer to the table of earth that had been pulled from the ground, I had to be rougher with my shoving. Not only did I have to displace the ones in front of me, but they also had to move to the side and displace others so I could get around them. Most kept their mouths shut when they realized that I could physically move them out of the way with relative ease, but some were more vocal about their displeasure. I ignored them. I also noticed others doing the same as Marcus and me. The first to leap up and position themselves at the front were either the more opportunistic or situationally aware, which didn't require them to be the strongest. The noise level grew as the reshuffling intensified, but by then, I'd made it to the front. The map and the table it was on were easily large enough to have 20 people surround it, and there were not 20 people here I feared. I told Abigail some of the people here felt threatening, but that number was not as exaggerated as I made it sound. There were roughly 10 that I became wary of after meeting them. Most were holding in their auras and hiding themselves enough that directly knowing who was stronger was impossible. I was doing the same as they were, holding in my aura, so I knew they weren't getting the full reading from me either, but that only made people cautious. Without knowing definitively where you ranked made things a bit more nebulous. If I had to pick one to be at the top of the list I had to worry about, it would be the Admiral. With him, I didn't just have his personal power to consider. He had a large backing, and that was something to consider as well. It was also why no one was adamant about dethroning him or stealing the microphone if I had to put a name to it. I was also alright with letting him lead because I sure as shit wasn't. I was fine with leading my own city, proud of it even, but I was not about to saddle myself with being in charge of so many people even if I did manage to bully my way up. A person was smart, but people were stupid. If the man wanted that honor, I would let him have it. The main reason I was fine with leading the people who came with me was because I cared about them. I'd lived with them for a couple of years, fought with them, and bled with some of them. I didn't give one shit about most of the people here. Caring in the base humanitarian way didn't count. Sure, their deaths would be sad on the fact a life was ended, but I wouldn't lose sleep over it on an individual level. Marcus forced his way through after me and was standing firmly next to me again while both of us looked over the map. This side west of the river was full of trees and plant life as the terraforming our planet underwent made everything explode in growth. But most of it had been cut down or removed by the people here already. Mainly to make room for camps, but some did it for other reasons. Wood for crafting or building furniture or other camping amenities. Plants uprooted to clear the ground or, if they were edible, eaten. Putting over 200,000 people in close proximity had a detrimental effect on the environment. Who would have guessed? The map most likely wasn't up to date on the deforesting efforts that were currently taking place, but it did show them. It showed where trees had already been taken down or where other obstacles were removed. "How up to date is this?" the man from Yellowstone asked. His aura felt like a mixture of fire and earth before, but now that I was closer, it felt more like a dormant volcano. It was little surprised that all the other people that made their way to the front were the ones I suspected of being barons. Jayla, from Mountainside. Travis from Yellowstone. Devin from Denver. Nick the Sparky Edgelord. Patrick from Harbor Deep, wherever that was. Vanessa from Eternal Flame Falls. Vernon from New Orleans. Zuri from New York. Liam from Boston. Erwin from the Bayou. The last man felt the weakest and was just on the edge of what I suspected was barren level. He also looked the most humorous, as his image reminded me of Crocodile Dundee, and the fact he came from the Bayou only made it better. It was also a little suspect that two barren-level people came from such close proximity. Vernon and Erwin were both from Louisiana. Did the swamp grow? The map we had back in our camp showed most of North America. West of the mountains wasn't shown, and anything to the far south was also left off. But what used to be Louisiana should be visible. I'd have to check it later. As of a few days ago, we'll update it as soon as possible. The Admiral said. It went without mentioning that he also had a place at the table. The river was off on the eastern portion of the map, and that was where most of my focus was. For Abigail and the rest with water affinities to fight at their best, being near water would help. It would also benefit Marcus, who would be fighting next to us. Being near water also wouldn't hinder anyone except Rachel and the rare fire affinity people we had. Affinities were usually spread out and averaged over a population large enough, but we noticed that there weren't a lot of fire affinities in our city. It was little surprise considering there were no sources of fire mana nearby and the city actively hindered them for nearly half the year, but it was still surprising just how little there were. Our most popular affinity by far was ice. It hadn't been at first. Gabriel and I weren't alone in the beginning, but ice also didn't stand out. It was about average in terms of numbers, even with the rest of the common affinities. That changed over time. Affinities could be changed. They could also be evolved, but that wasn't what I meant. They could be changed from one element to another. The affinity you started with didn't mean you were stuck with it forever. The process was slow and extremely time-consuming, and it also required a large source of the target affinity's mana, but it was possible. Nature supplying large quantities of ice mana during winter made it easy for those who wished to change to do so. It wasn't mandatory, and I didn't advocate for anyone to switch, but a decent number of people decided to. Most did it because it was the smart play. Frostheim was located right next to a tremendous source of ice mana, and it also spent months smothered in more ice mana than most people knew what to do with. That, and also having techniques they could use to refine their bodies, people were sold. They also knew that more ice techniques would be coming. I knew a few did it because of me, either because of some hero worship or to emulate what I do, but I tried not to think about those people. It was odd to me that they so easily let go of their affinity to clutch onto my coattails. Lastly, there were the rare few who didn't like the affinity they were given, or manifested, depending on how it was looked at. They either hated it and actively sought to switch or held no attachment to it and were open to various options. One in particular refused anything to do with blood, even though that was the affinity he was given. That being said, while the number of people who switched was relatively small, it swung the numbers enough to put ice at the top. When most affinities started around the same amount, getting a boost, however small, was enough to propel it above others. Since there weren't any glaciers or icebergs nearby, it didn't much matter where we fought. Water would help as it made creating ice easier, but it wasn't required. Still, being near the river would help more than hurt, so that was where I directed my attention. Marcus, what do you think of here? I pointed toward the northeast section of the circle that depicted the wall-building efforts. The map showed more than just current conditions, as it also showed what they planned to build as well. Where I indicated was around 30 degrees north of east of the obelisk, and it was the section that was closest to the river. The entire ring of wall never intersected it, as the river was far enough away, but it was within a few hundred yards. Our backs would be to the river if we got in trouble. He answered, If the wall falls and we're pushed back, we'll have nowhere to go. I had the same thought, but I looked at it differently. It is also one less direction to defend if the other sections fall. I said, if the worst happens and other sections are overrun, we'll end up surrounded. If the blight-infected denizens punch through and manage to get behind our lines, we would be hemmed in and assaulted on both sides. Marcus looked up. You expect them to fail? We were keeping our words soft so as not to be overheard. Yes, I said. We must plan for the worst, and in the case it happens, running won't be an option. While discussing the notification and the specific wording used with my family's counsel, it was brought up that the test only ended when all the defenders were dead, not defeated. There was an argument about if one ran away if they were still considered defenders, but we didn't know enough to make that distinction. We had to plan around being considered a defender from the start and never losing that designation. Even if it didn't say that, I wasn't sure how well running away would work. If the horde of enemies was endless, a fighting retreat was impossible. If they were fast, we wouldn't be able to get away. The best scenario, if the wall was breached, was to put the river at our backs so we only had to fight in a reduced line. It would mean failure meant death, but it would also be the only way to avoid being surrounded. That's risky. Marcus kept looking at the map intently and I turned to do the same. If we build a fallback line from the wall to the river, in addition to fortifying our portion of the wall, we can have defenses on all sides. It would also screw everyone else, but I couldn't consider that right now. My city came first, and if we had the chance, we would help others. I don't see anywhere better, Marcus said after finishing his assessment. That's most likely our best bet. Then it's agreed? I asked. Agreed, he answered. Chapter 269, Introductions. With our decision made, it wasn't hard to stake our claim on the area we wanted. Being among the first to choose helped matters, and those in the same ring as us didn't care to fight us over it as they had other spots they favored. No one outside the first ring was given much of a chance to challenge Marcus and I over it. Some tried to holler or shout, but they were ignored. I waited to see where everyone else who made their way to the front picked but didn't stick around for the masses. I would get an updated map later as I had better things to do. The Admiral and a few of the other faction leaders that fell under his banner chose to defend the South. Liam, the suspected Baron from Boston, and Zuri from New York chose sections close to the Admiral, putting 3 Baron-level people in that one cardinal direction. My fellow Canadian and her accompanying duo chose the West with sections all right next to each other. Jayla from Mountainside in the center with Travis and Devin on either side. Nick, with his fancy lightning robe, picked the North along with Vernon from Orleans and Vanessa from Eternal Flame Falls. We had another Baron level join us, and he had picked his section with similar reasons as our own. Patrick Stafford's, along with the rest of the Great Lakes Alliance, would be in the East with us. They picked a section further to the south, and there were a few factions that would squeeze in between us, but we wouldn't hold the East alone. The last of who I suspected were Barons, Michaela Stewart from the Heartlands Alliance and Irwin from the aptly named Bayou faction, chose the Northwest and Southwest. With those people having chosen, it was the rest of those who gathered to do so, but that wasn't all. Another reason I wasn't touching the role of organizer was that he would have to go around to every faction and group that wasn't invited to the meeting and tell them where to go. They'd most likely be used to fill in gaps or reinforce weaker factions with a bold enough leader to attend, even though they weren't nobles or had significant strength. There was also the need to coordinate everything, and that was a massive undertaking in its own right. Marking out on the site where one section started and ended. Double-checking everywhere had either the same amount of people or an equal amount of strength. Even though my trust in people wasn't high, I doubted the Admiral would blunder his chance to gain recognition. That fact he was so heavily pushing for it, and he would utterly fail if he messed up, was more reassuring than if it was only death on the line. More than that, it was prioritizing that made me let him shoulder the responsibility. I had just under 3 days to get my faction into the best position I could, and I would not be wasting it coordinating with every Jim and Jack that wanted an audience. My faction came first. That being said, I briskly walked back towards our camp to get those plans in motion. Marcus would kickstart his side, and we would meet together to coordinate between us sometime later. Sometime at night, to not take away from working hours too much. Abigail, Hal, Austin, and everyone else were ready and waiting upon my return, but there was another surprise waiting for me back at our camp. 2 surprises, if I counted Rachel's return. Her appearance was more than welcome, and I honestly expected her earlier. It was another pillar for us to rely on, and it eased some of my worry. It was hard to tell from afar, but as soon as I got close I knew it was her. I hadn't seen her in months. She was gone by the time I returned, so it was back when I first left that I last saw her, and that was in October-ish. It was now June. Time truly does fly. Similar to everyone else, her travels and experience over the winter months left her much stronger than before them. I could feel the power radiating off her and knew that she successfully forged her core. I had no doubts, as she was quite skilled when it came to all things mana. While hearing her story intrigued me and I wanted nothing else to sit down and listen to all the details, other things had my attention. The second surprise, standing off to the side, was also relegated to a later problem. Seeing him was less joyful than seeing my aunt, but I couldn't very well ignore him. Not after he'd tried so hard to mend our relationship. He was extending the olive branch and I wasn't going to slap it away. "I believe Abigail briefed everyone on what was decided?" I said, and everyone nodded. Austin looked overly sullen for an odd reason, but I didn't dwell on it. I also didn't say anything about Hal's smug grin. A map that our scouts had cobbled together was laid out on the table. Everyone stood around, and it left much to be desired. Whoever made the map the Admiral brought out was much better than whoever we had. "I've selected this section for us to defend." I pointed toward the northeastern portion. "Marcus has selected the section directly to the south here." Moving my finger to illustrate. "I want the builders and everyone with an earth affinity to work on building a wall starting here." There was supposed to be a cartographer coming around to mark where each section stood, so I pointed a bit inside where I thought our section would start. "Set up a resource collection for any stone you can find, but I suspect we'll have to make do with packed earth. There wasn't a lot of hard stone blocks to go around. I suggest we take it from here." I drew 2 lines leading from our section and towards the river. "It will work twofold to gather earth and dig a defensive trench if the sections around us fall." Everyone followed along and watched me detail what I thought was best. "The bison won't be much help in this fight, and neither will the horses." It was a blow to waste all the effort getting them here, but that was life. "Set them up as beasts of burden and have all carpenters or woodworkers on making carts they can pull." Relegating them to beast of burden was making as much use out of them as we could. After I was finished, they all chimed in with small adjustments or ways the plan could be improved, but it overall stayed the same. We needed a wall, and we needed it fast. "Jonathan," I called to the man, "you and I will blast it with as much spirit energy as we can." He winced, remembering the raw pain that came with overdrawing on his anchor. I saw it and held in a wince of my own. "I know it will be painful, but we don't have time to enchant it." I wished the notification had come earlier so we could do just that, but we couldn't. We would be hard-pressed to saturate all of the wall before the timer was up, but we would try our best. Enchanting the wall would take weeks, and that was already for a rush job. It was physically impossible to get it done in 3 days. Gabriel and the other spell-focused enchanters will do what they can, but a formation is out of the question, I said. Spell-focused enchanting was faster and more versatile, but that trade-off made it generally weaker. For people of the same skill, a runic engraved formation would always beat out a magic enchantment. Instead of relying on runes and having to painstakingly carve them into the object they wanted to enchant, they instead projected what Gabriel called a spell matrix onto them. I wasn't clear on the exact process, but they somehow anchored a persistent spell onto an object or area. It was something I would explore when I had the time. It took a few more minutes to sort everything out and get through the specifics, but we were off to the races within an hour of leaving the meeting. My job, with my above-average strength, was to find and haul boulders for the builders to work with. In between doing that, I would pour as much of my spirit energy into the wall as possible. It was going to be a rough couple of days. But before I could get started on any of that, I had to deal with Ashton. The man was standing in our camp waiting for an audience with me, and I wasn't sure how long he'd been there as the meeting took up most of my time. The man wasn't dressed in armor, and he looked much the same as I last saw him. The biggest difference, or not really a difference as it was the same, was his power. He felt nearly the same as the last time. He gained a tremendous amount of levels from the demons like everyone else, and it felt like he got a few more since then, but that was all. He didn't have a deep well of power inside him, and he didn't give off a stronger feeling of righteous light through an upgraded law. So unless he went all in on upgrading his body, he was woefully behind. From the non-existent threat level that I felt from the man, I doubted he even did that. There were a handful of my own people that now stood taller than him when it come to how they felt. He could be hiding it deep down better than I could detect, but I highly doubted it. "Ashton," I greeted. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I wasn't even sure he would come. The troubles he was having in his city didn't leave him in a good position to march south for half a year. His worry about what Lakeshore would do was also another reason I didn't think he would make the trip. "I've come to have words with you if you have the time," he said, "and to make introductions if you're amenable." That surprised me. "Introductions?" Ashton smiled. "Yes. As you know, we sent a number of scouts east to connect us to the capital, and while none of them got through, I ran into them here." The man was very clearly excited about this fact. "Oh?" Running into them here was a surprise to me, but it was great news to get back in touch. The capital has its own problems, but I'm sure you can guess most of them. The change was hard on everyone. That it was. "But," Ashton continued, "the fact they're here is good news." I wasn't sure where this enthusiasm was coming from. The happiness and joy he felt at getting in touch with the capital was odd to me. "Why is that good news?" I asked. "Do they have information we don't? A way to communicate or travel? Insight that they're willing to share? Are they strong? Strong enough to help us with this test?" My questions came one right after the other, leaving him no room to answer. I didn't think he could answer, but I asked them anyway. "What do you mean, why is that good news?" He looked confused. "It's a return to order. The Prime Minister died, sadly, but a new one has stepped up. Most of the East is pacified and people can live without worry except for the far north." I didn't share his enthusiasm because I didn't understand how that affected me. Ottawa, Montreal, most of Quebec, they're all under control without any roaming monsters or dungeons going out of control. "Isn't it amazing?" Ashton gushed. "I think I see where this is going." "You joined them, didn't you?" I asked. The more he talked, the more it sounded like a recruitment pitch. One that Ashton himself had already fallen for. "Of course I did, why wouldn't I? They're the government. I only built my city to be a shelter until such a time order could be reinstituted, and now it can. There's no reason not to join them." "Oh dear." He and I had wildly different views. "And this person you want me to meet is?" I asked. "The new Prime Minister," Ashton said proudly. "He's almost a baron, like you. He's reshaped Ottawa into a haven in this new world and has personally saved thousands of people." Meeting this man wasn't in the plans, and it would delay things even more, but it also wasn't something I could refuse. If what Ashton said was true, and he controlled most of the East, he would either be a massive trading partner or a massive threat depending on the stance he took. If he believed that all of Canada still belonged to him, we would be at odds immediately. There was no way in hell I was giving up my city. I had left our meeting and went straight to speaking with Ashton, but there were things I had to do before I could go off and meet this new Prime Minister. I also considered putting it off until after the test, but decided not to. If I survived, I wasn't going to be in the mood to meet anyone, let alone a self-declared Prime Minister. I wasn't even sure how that even worked. Was the man voted in? If he was, how was an election held? My main thought was about how it would play out into the future. Democracy, as much as it was laudable, didn't really have a place anymore. That wasn't how the world was going to work after the change. Forcing that, either because of ideals of general hope, was an effort in futility. It was bound to fail just as socialism was bound to fail before. It was fine on paper or in a vacuum, but when it came time to employ it, things would fall apart. People with powers weren't going to let it, the same way people with money weren't going to give it up. Levels made the idea of equality moot. It was sad, and not something I liked to think about, but that didn't make it untrue. With tangible power, one person was not equal to another. Hypothetically, if what this new Prime Minister was doing lasted, say, 10 years, maybe 20, if he was lucky. How would someone in the D rank, or maybe higher, feel about being treated the same as someone in the F rank? I for one would detest such a comparison. I already felt pity for them, but the idea we were the same was impossible to comprehend. They were fine, happy even, to languish and relegate themselves to a lower rank, while that was unacceptable to me. It was leaving their safety and well-being in the hands of another willingly. They weren't standing on the walls during a defense. They weren't charging into a horde of demons to defend their home. To say that we were equal, that was fundamentally impossible. The higher ranks would grow angry and resentful. Once that happened, it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down if an outside force didn't do it beforehand. For good or bad, democracy wasn't plausible anymore. Not unless some very specific conditions were met. Like if everyone was at the same rank. A republic was more likely, but I didn't see that being the main mode of governance. In my head, and from what any sane mind could extrapolate, feudalism was the way of the world again. That could take many shapes and sizes, from a just lord to an evil one, but that was how this system pushed us to be. The strongest ruled and the rest were either along for the ride, or they could set out to become strong themselves. The title being available to pylon owners was only going to be the start. It would begin with barons and grow to kings and emperors. It was only a matter of time. There would be a few who fought against it, setting up senates and republics, there always were, but by and large, kingdoms and city-states were in our future. Maybe a council or oligarchy here and there, but I doubted those would be plentiful. Guilds maybe, if one leaned into fantasy. Mercenary guilds or merchant guilds. Mage towers too, if one was inclined to found them, but those subscribed to the same ideas. One person or a small group with power at the top. The possibilities were still something I couldn't even guess at. It really depended on the person at the top and what he or she chose to set up. There were a few reasons that I delayed going with Ashton for introductions straight away. One was to get the things I needed to into motion. Most of the council was already out explaining our plans and getting people on the right jobs, and I also had to do the same. Hal already had his order at work, and I needed to fill Elliot in. His order had more warriors, and many of them would be given the same job as me. Search and bring back any stone they could find. Another reason to delay was I needed to think about how this meeting would go. I knew, in the end, this meeting could go in a wildly different direction that I couldn't possibly think of ahead of time, but I also didn't want to use that as an excuse to go in blind. My first question was, what's his endgame? Was he going for a land grab as quickly as he could before transitioning into something more feudal? Get people to fold back into a government entity before using that power to change it into a kingdom of sorts? That would be the most obvious play. There was also the possibility that he truly thought that he could reinstitute a new Canada of sorts. That would make the man terribly naive and downright stupid. Other than thinking about what his endgame was, the next question was what he hoped to get out of a meeting with me. Traveling by foot, Fort Hope was over a month away. By wagon and horse, it was roughly 2 weeks with the new road and chopping down trees in the way. A high-level wagoneer could cut it down even further, but on average, it took 2.5 weeks. That being said, the distance to wherever this new capital stood would be measured in months. That was on top of the fact there was a dangerous forest in between us, and them was supposedly impassable. Ashton's scouts had tried with no luck. We didn't send any as it wasn't important for us. We mainly sent them south and west, to Marcus City or to find Mountainside. If what Ashton said was true, and there was a forest separating us filled with strong beasts, what was he hoping to accomplish from our meeting? Was he going to try and sway me? Ask me to join his faction like he did Ashton? That seemed most likely, but if he'd met Ashton, and presumably asked the man about me, he would already know my answer to that. Hell, enough stewing. I played with various outcomes and gave it the thought required, but I wouldn't get to the bottom of it until meeting the man myself, and I was tired of playing what-ifs. After finishing up giving people direction, I found Ashton again. All right, lead the way. He headed west from our camp. Coming in on boats put us on the northeastern side of the obelisk already, and we mostly disembarked and set up where we landed. It also made things easier that our section was already nearby for that exact reason. The crowds were annoying to get through, but most of them were busy working on something or another. The notification everyone got pushed things into motion and worked to kick the ants' nest in a way. We had to pass through a few other factions or go around a campsite or two to reach it, but it wasn't long before we came upon it. The campsite itself wasn't anything fancy. It was similar to all the others around, with canvas tents set up and the occasional wooden structure or one made from earth pulled from the ground. Tents could be a lot more sophisticated now that magic could be used in their construction. My own tent was a marvel at work, and even though it was as large as a bedroom, it didn't need to be supported in any way in the middle with odd poles holding it up around the edges that could hold a lot more than it looked. It was also cozy in a way that tents before the change weren't. Given my powers, it was possible to conjure up ice into a structure to live in, but that was both annoying and draining. It constantly drained mana and mental power to keep it conjured and frozen. Even if water was dragged from the river and frozen into shape, it would still drain me to keep it cold, even if that was a lot easier than keeping ice conjured. There were other ways around it, but the problem wasn't enough to force me to explore them. I quite liked my tent, actually. Ashton knew his way around, and the guards keeping watch around the campsite seemed to know him, and we were let in easily. The guards themselves were average in terms of strength, on the lower end of those in the orders, but above those who weren't members. For once, Identify came through and their levels were in the high 70s and 80s. It was about what I expected. There were some standouts on the higher end near 90, but those were few and far between. The campsite was organized, which was a point in the man's favor. Some I'd seen were sprawling hodgepodges that weren't given any thought. The lines were clean and everything was separated accordingly. The temporary smithies were set up together along with the butcher tables with their own spot away from everything. Hunting was hard with so many people around, but there was the occasional fruitful outing. The outhouses were also neatly built far away from everything else, and there seemed to be someone with cleanse going around to them as there wasn't a smell. It was a practice we learned to employ early. No one liked the smell of shit. So far, it was about what I expected. The main tent was larger than the rest, and that was where Ashton led me. Not much of a surprise. The guards stationed outside the tent were a step above the others. Their levels were lost on me as Identify didn't work, but I was experienced enough using my aura that I could tell they were easily in the 90s. They also had a stronger aura of their own that was easy to feel. Mine rubbed up against theirs naturally as we got closer. They were the first people in the camp that I noticed. They were nowhere near the threat level of the people at the meeting, but they also weren't easily dismissible. Ashton had a word with the pair in front of the tent's entrance, and one quickly ducked inside. Ashton returned next to me, and we awaited a response. It was slightly aggravating to come to him and then wait, but it wasn't the end of the world. When Ashton first proposed the idea, a part of me thought to demand him come to me, but that was just petty posturing. I like to think I was above that. That thought was immediately followed by an ego check. It was getting increasingly easier to justify my attitude to certain situations, and I wasn't sure I liked it. The wait wasn't long, and the same guard stepped out. "You can go in now." "Thank you," I said and entered. Ashton followed behind me. The inside of the tent was nice but not gaudy. The things inside, furniture and equipment, were well made but not ornamental. Everything I saw had a use. My opinion of the man was increasing. The man himself stood from his chair when I entered. The table was small, to fit inside the tent and not take up too much space, and the 3 chairs laid out around it were also sized to fit the table. His skin was on the paler side, as most Canadians I'd met, with dark hair. There was a hint of stubble, but that was all in terms of facial hair. He greeted me with a friendly smile and had the bearing of a man with natural charisma. I see how he moved up. Charisma wasn't his only trait. Much like the guards outside the tent, he had a weight to him that others lacked. He was even stronger than Ashton. The boast that he was almost a baron wasn't unfounded, it seemed. I estimated that he'd be able to do it with enough people behind him. The casualties would be high, but enough would do the trick. "Christopher Zelensky, right?" He greeted politely. "I've heard a lot about you. It seems you have me at a disadvantage. I don't even know your name," I responded. The man shot a quick look at Ashton before looking back at me. I thought Ashton here would introduce me, but it seems I was wrong. "No matter, I am Ryan Claremont. You may call me Ryan if you wish." Ryan it is, and just Christopher is fine. We shook hands and both took a seat along with Ashton. I'll get to the point, as we both have a lot to do before the timer runs out, he said, and I nodded appreciatively. The reason I reached out is for a few reasons. Ashton tells me you battled demons not that long ago. I wasn't sure where this was going, and it also wasn't something I thought would be discussed. Yes, we fought them last year. Do you have any suspicions of who was responsible for the summoning? I was told that you made some headway on tracking the demons, but wasn't told if you got anywhere with it. Ryan asked. It was disappointing to admit, but I told the man what we found. We located a few other traces and found areas of corruption, but leads into who was responsible ended nowhere, sadly. We're still on the lookout for any other signs or traces of their mana, but there's not much else I can do. I was afraid of that. Ryan sighed. The reason I ask is because we've had our own run-in with demons. I instantly got serious. I was not looking forward to another dust-up with them. If they managed to create a portal... Ryan noticed my change of attitude instantly. Not to worry. We've done the same and rooted out the threat. We were given little choice in the matter and many were lost. His expression was sad and I knew the feeling. I looked at Ashton. Did we miss one? We thoroughly searched the area for any stray demons and we scoured the countryside with scouts to find any that ran away. I had thought we got them all when the problem didn't resurface and all traces of demonic corruption faded away. Ashton shook his head. I don't believe so. From Ashton's descriptions of what you faced, the type was not the same. We faced something closer to hellfire elementals than hellhounds and demonlings. Ryan added, a second summoning? I voiced my suspicions out loud. Ryan and Ashton nodded. That is what we believe. If it happened twice, how many other times has it happened? Do you know of any other instances? I asked. Communication isn't what it used to be, so I can't claim with confidence that the answer to that is no. Ryan said, but we haven't heard of any other instances nearby. We hope to ask around here with people from all over, but it's surprisingly difficult to get information out of them. This didn't have good implications. That brings me to the second reason for this meeting. Ryan said, we wish to create a coalition of sorts. An agreement to face all demons together and search out those responsible for any summonings. I see no reason to refuse. If another incursion is found, I will fight with you should the chance arise. I said, if a portal is created, I left the rest unsaid. Right? Can you tell me more about that? From what we've gathered, we assumed that was impossible, yet you claim otherwise. You were also the only one to see it. Ryan said. The subtle shot at my honor made my face harden. It was annoying to be considered a liar, no matter how innocuous the insinuation was. I do not know how it was possible. All I know was it was in the process of being created. My words were hard. Ashton can attest to the explosion and the state I was in following. That kind of power isn't something I or anyone could wield. I see, Ryan said. I'm not claiming that you were wrong, but something that large needs to be carefully investigated. I've had people look into and research the issue again, and we've come across a few ways that it could be possible. The notification we were all given added another. How did the notification indicate a way a demonic portal was possible? Our leading theory is that a demonic world is in this integration with us. Technically, with both our world and theirs protected in the same way by being newly integrated, a portal between the two was made possible. Possible. We weren't sure what or who else were out there in our integration. Sipterus, our summon teacher during the tutorial, let slip that there were dwarves, but he said nothing of demons. If that's the case, this won't be our last run-in with demons, I said. End of chapter 270.